All right. So today we're going to talk, or at this point, I guess I don't know when you're, maybe it's tonight, whatever, whenever you're listening to this, we're going to talk about device management of hearing loss. This is usually a guest lecture. Dr. Adamovich comes in to give this, but she actually just switched jobs. She teaches at AT Still University now. So I changed around some things, took some stuff out, added a little bit of stuff in. So it's kind of my slides based on her presentation. All right. So there's three main types of devices that we want to talk about. The first one is hearing aids, which look like this here. I mean, there's various ways they can look. We'll talk about that in a second. But overall, this is kind of your generic look of a hearing aid. You can have bone anchored or bone transmission devices, and that's what this guy has. Remember, bone anchored and bone transmission devices take advantage of bone conduction, which I can do with my cool tuning fork here. Probably remember that from wow, that was pretty loud. Probably remember that from one of the lecture that you just watched. And then cochlear implants. Cochlear implants actually interface directly with the nerves. So hearing aids, of course, amplify sound. Bone conduction devices may or may not amplify sound. It depends. I mean, they can just conduct sounds through other means, but they can also amplify. And then you have cochlear implants, which do an entirely different kind of thing. It gets the sound or some sort of stimulation to the auditory nerve through a different means. We'll talk about that, through the rest of the slides. Oh, this is the cochlear implant picture that I have for you right here. So you can see how they're all a little bit different. Okay. Well, actually, we're going to talk about this in a second, but I want to point out hearing aids require no surgery. Bone anchored or bone conduction devices do require a little bit of surgery to actually anchor them to the bone. Now, you can wear bone conduction headsets. In fact, they're kind of like this. So these are my most favorite headphones of all time. They are not bone conduction. They're just like sport headphones. They're waterproof. You can wear them while you're running or probably not swimming. I don't know. I don't have a pool, so I don't know. But they're pretty cool. The way they work is they've got this resistance right here, so you can put this around your ear, and then they kind of push into your ear. So they form a pretty good seal by this tension that they put on. There are bone conduction headsets that look a lot like this that you put on, and they sit on your mastoid right here, on the mastoid process of your skull. And you can listen to music or whatever through bone conduction. You don't have to have an audiologist write a prescription or anything. You can buy these on Amazon, like tonight, if you wanted a pair. But for someone who's actually using it for, hearing amplification, you probably don't want to rely just on a headset that can fall off of your mastoid process or that you could lose. These, the ones that require surgery, are a little bit more permanent. You're using them all the time. So they're definitely like a better, more permanently attached kind of thing. It's making it more like part of you rather than just something that you wear occasionally. Also, another difference between the bone conduction headsets and the actual bone conduction devices is we have skin and blood vessels and a little layer of fat between. I mean, there's not much. If you feel right here, you can touch the bone pretty well, but there is still some padding there. And of course, some have more than others, and so that creates a problem too. But any padding that you have, anything between the bone and the actual bone conduction device dampens the signal. So these, because they're surgically implanted, they're actually in the bone. They can definitely vibrate the bone perfectly and work much better than bone conduction headsets. But again, if you're just using it for fun, you don't really need surgery just to wear a bone conduction headset. And then we have cochlear implants as well. Those require surgery too, but it's a more involved surgery, and we'll talk about why that is soon. Okay, so, this is all about hearing and how it works, but we just went over the anatomy of hearing, so we don't actually need to talk about that. Okay, so let's jump into hearing aids. What do hearing aids do? I mean, they amplify sound. That's really all it is. It gets a little more complicated than that in very specific terms. It doesn't just amplify everything. Old hearing aids would amplify everything. And those like ear trumpets that you would see people use like in the 1800s, those would amplify everything as well. But that's not really the goal. If you look at this audiogram, you can see that this person needs different amounts of amplification. If we just said raise everything by 20 dB across the board, well, this would be, perfect. This isn't impaired. 250 hertz isn't impaired anyway. But we could raise it by 20 dB and get it to 0. 500 hertz is about 25 dB. So then if we raise it by 20, it'd be 5. But if you come down here, 1000 hertz is at 70. We raise it by 20, and it's at 50 dB. It's still impaired. So we can't just raise everything all together. We have to raise the sound, we have to amplify the sound by different amounts based on the individual's hearing loss. And this is why it's kind of hard to figure out what product is best for what person. Each person needs individual filters, that kind of thing, and specific tuning of their hearing devices. Different hearing aids, of course, offer different amounts of customization. Really small ones don't customize as well as really large ones. But then there's other concerns that we'll talk about that might work against that. So you can see that what happens here is this might be fine where it is. We could leave these, the left ear is good where it is. The right ear needs some amplification, but then over here, everything needs amplification. And this group, the 4000 to 8000 hertz group, needs even more amplification than the 1000 to 3000 hertz group. So we need at least 3 different types of amplification going on. And if we wanted to get more specific, we certainly could. So hearing aids rely on our typical hearing makeup to transduce the sound to the brain. They're still relying on hair cells. What we're doing is we're making some of these louder so that the hair cells can actually respond to these sounds at the same level as the other sounds. So we're trying to kind of normalize these sounds, but it's still hair cells that are actually doing the responding. So if you can think about that, if some of the hearing loss is from actual cell death of the hair cells, we amplify it so that the remaining cells can actually, transduce this. They can hear it, that they'll respond to it. But there could be distortion because there aren't as many hair cells in those locations as there should be. And here, this is what we're trying to bring everything up to, is approximately this little smiley face right here. Right? So we want to be at or above 20 hertz of amplification needed. So if you can hear all of these different frequencies at or below, I should have said, sorry, not above, at or below 20 hertz amplification, then you're good. That's considered normal hearing for adults. So that's where we want to bring these. And you can see that different frequencies need to be brought up by different amounts. Okay, so there's several different types of... I did say 7, but I actually meant... I guess I did say there are at least 7. This should have just said there are several styles of hearing aids. This that you can see right here is a picture of one of the very earliest kinds of hearing aids. This is from, I think, the 60s. Just a super simple hearing aid. The technology in this thing is essentially what you can fit into the tiniest hearing aid now. So it's not like super good for being so large, but it's the kind of thing that would be worn on the top of the pants, on the belt loop, and that would have to be pointed towards the speaker so it could collect the sound and transduce it through a wire and then just present it more loudly to the listener. This is considered a body aid. It's worn on the body, so it's not necessarily just housed on the ear. But again, this is an early type. We still do have body aids. They're certainly more advanced than this one is, but this is going to be basically what they look like. They're completely plastic now. Sometimes they hang around the neck, but this is your basic idea of a body aid. Aside from that, we've got behind the ear aids. Actually, yeah, let's just go to this picture here. So we've got behind the ear. Let's see. Do I have all of my pictures on here? Yeah, I've got them all in here. So we can just look at these. So we've got behind the ear here, which has this large hearing aid body, which sits right behind the ear. Then you've got this little canal, this little tube that runs down into your ear canal, and then there's kind of like an earbud piece at the other end. So the large part there is going to give you a lot of customization over how much amplification you actually need. If you need a lot of varied amplification, there's something very strange going on with your hearing where there's dips at 1,000 hertz, but then it comes back up to almost normal at 2,000 hertz, and then it's normal at 5,000, but it dips down at 6,000, and it comes back in a weird place at 8,000. You might need something that can account for all that. And a larger hearing aid can account for that. It has more sophisticated amplification techniques. You can put in different filters. You can put in multiple filters at one time that work together in different ways. But it's also very obvious. And a lot of people don't like their hearing aids to be as obvious. There's a lot of self-consciousness that goes along with it. So a lot of times they will sacrifice this with all of its cool customization and better, it's basically better. They'll sacrifice that for something that is a little bit less obvious. You have these in the ear. Those are made to fit within the external canal. They kind of take up everything. A large part of them is kind of in the pinna. They're even more obvious than, not more than this, but they're more obvious than like these little guys like this that sit in the canal. So we're kind of stepping down from here to here. They're large, they're still obvious. They come in a skin tone, but of course everybody has slightly different skin tones, and they have basically 3 different skin tones, maybe 4. And what are the odds that any of our skin tones are going to perfectly match these 4 basic colors of plastic that they have? It's not very good. So, I mean, maybe a lot of people fool themselves that you can't see these, but I feel like just go ahead and get this crazy silver one, because here we can see it and we know that you're trying to hide it. Here we can see it and we know that you're totally okay with it. So, my personal take. You've also got these in the canal. They're a little bit smaller. They fit a little bit more deeply in the canal. They're less obvious. And then you have these completely in the canal designs, and they actually fit all the way down inside the canal. These fit so snugly in the canal that you actually can't take them out and put them in yourself. You have to have your audiologist take them out and put them in. Sometimes they fall out on their own, and that's okay. But you have to then go see your audiologist to have it put back in. A lot of times people with completely in the canal aids will have those, but then if they fall out or if they need to take them out to itch their ear or something, they'll have something else to fall back on in any of these other designs. Okay, so what are some of the ones we didn't talk about? We've got this open fit design. It uses this really, really, really thin tubing, and then you've kind of got a little bit of an open air. You can't really see this. Do I have a better picture of this? Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so hold on the open fit design, but it's got a thin flexible tubing. So if you have longer hair, it's easier for you to hide this large body back here. And then you've got the receiver in the canal, which basically is like a really tiny earbud that just fits all the way in. And then this has a longer tube on it, so this can sit elsewhere. There's a couple things that you're balancing here. One is price. The really small ones are going to be more expensive than these larger, clunkier ones. Why is that? Because there's smaller technology that goes into these. They have similar filters and similar receivers, microphones that go into these, but because they've had to be made much smaller, it's a little bit more expensive. It costs more to have technology that's shrunken down. Sometimes these can be a little bit more expensive too because of just the sheer amount of technology that they have in them. Remember, they're really good hearing aids. They have a lot of functionality. You can have presets for different kinds of occasions. So if you're at a concert, if you're at dinner, if you're just at home, you can switch between all these things. And sometimes that can bump the price up as well. So sometimes if someone is, they can't put forward a lot of money to get the hearing aid that they want, they might end up with one of these because they're the cheaper, older, more standard variety. And then, of course, the other thing that you're balancing here is what do you like in terms of hearing? So do you like to be able to have all this customization, or do you just want to pop it in and forget about it, and it doesn't work great, but it works okay, and that's fine for you? You're also balancing your own personal view of yourself. So do you not want people to know that there's any hearing problems going on, or do you just not care? And that's part of you. So there's all these different things to consider. Here's another view of these different kinds of hearing aids. This is an in the canal design. There's this little antenna that comes out so you can actually program these. You have to program these not on the hearing aid. They're so small that you can't program it through the hearing aid. You have to have like a remote control essentially. Then you also have this. This is the in the canal, but not completely in the canal. And then you've got this, which is your typical just outer ear design. One thing about these is that this one still allows you to have all of the effects of your pinna. And this has most of them. This has most. The bigger it is, the more it's occluding your pinna. So this might sound a little bit more like what you're used to than this. Though, of course, the brain is really good at getting used to things. So you'll get used to this pretty quickly. The shape of your pinna changes, but your brain will change to accommodate that as well. And so then pretty soon the sound doesn't seem strange. Okay, so let's take a look at specifically some of these. Oh, here's a couple other things that I wanted to talk about that you're also balancing. So we talked about personal preference, your feeling of yourself. We're talking about the cost of the device. We're talking about what the device actually does. But then we also want to take into account, what does the user do? So is the user swimming a lot? Do they do a lot of physical activity? In that case, these invisible in the canal designs might not be that great. If you're swimming, you have to take the hearing aid out. And if you have to visit the audiologist to put it back in, you're going to be going in every day, and you might not be able to get an appointment every day. So that's just not going to work for you. If you're doing a lot of running, you can get, a lot of sweat collecting, and you might not want to wear your hearing aid during that kind of activity either. So that just might not work for you. There's also other factors to consider. My grandma has a hearing aid, but she doesn't have very good eyesight. And she has a small hearing aid. And when she drops it, it's like it's lost forever. I don't remember how many she's had to get over the years. I feel it's like she had to get 3 in the course of 2 years because she lost 2 of them. And the first one that she lost was like a month after she got it. So, and then of course, my dad finds them 6 months later under a couch or something. He's like, well, now you have 3 hearing aids. So there's a lot of things to take into account. We can say that one is better. Like, I have my preference of what I would get, but then of course that is something that I'm putting all this into. I know that I could afford one with all the fancy equipment. I know that I wouldn't care if it was a large silver or pink or neon green thing sitting behind my ear, because it's more important to me to just hear my surroundings like I do now. And I know that I want one that I can take off because I like to go jogging and stuff like that. I don't want one that I'm going to have to do a lot of work with. So different people have different, preferences. So we can't really put our own thoughts of what we think are better on to someone else, because they have a whole different set of concerns. So we've talked about this. We've got the behind the ear. This is good for mild to profound hearing loss. Again, that's because it's powerful. There's a lot of different things in there. You can use this with profound hearing loss because there is a lot going on. There's a lot of customization. There's a lot of different options. There's a lot of different amounts of amplification that can be done. And again, this is one of the large ones that sits right behind the pinna. Very obvious if you have short hair. This is another type. So here's the receiver in the ear. And you can see that it's a more flexible cord that's going on here. So this actually can sit down a little bit lower. It's a little bit less obvious, I suppose. But the receiver part is in the ear. So what's good about that is it's going to take in sound in a natural way. So if you look at some of these behind the ear designs, they're just pumping the sound into the ear. They're taking in the signal from the body. The receiver in the ear, oh no, what have I done? The receiver in the ear here will actually pull sound in and make it around here. And then it'll sound a little bit more natural. We've talked about pinna effects and things like that. So this is a great device for that in that respect. It's a little bit more expensive because of that. I think they're really cool. Other than that, they're very similar to the behind the ear device. So here's our in the ear and in the canal designs. You've got just a little hole for the battery, a program button right here, and then 2 microphones. So it's a very simple design. I'm sure a lot of us have seen these already. There's not a whole lot to say about that, except that one important thing I do want to touch on is that they're mild to moderately severe. So if you look at these, this can go up to profound, this can go up to profound, but these in the ear and in the canal aren't recommended for profound. You can get up to moderately severe. Well, why is that? It's just because it's the technology aspect. It's too small to have to fit all of the technology that you need to accurately represent what you need to create a better sound profile for the wearer. It's just too small. And then we've got our completely in the canal. You can see how deeply these actually fit. They're almost entirely invisible. You'd have to look right down into someone's ear to actually see this. And then, like I said, you need a remote control to actually control these things. There's no program button. There's nothing. It's just, it goes in there and it doesn't come out, because if it comes out, you need to go see your audiologist. One other thing that I don't have on this slide is that this is also not good for extreme types of hearing loss. This is good for mild, moderate, but it's not good for profound. It's not good for severe, because it just doesn't have the capability to hold all the components that we need to be able to amplify to that degree. All right, so we've got two different types of ear molds too. This is what I wanted to touch on way earlier. So we've got our conventional closed ear mold, and we've also got the open fit ear mold. There's a really interesting difference here. One of those differences is we know that if we have typical age-related hearing loss, we need to amplify the low end and not the high end. With the open fit, you actually can then have sound come into the ear the natural way, and that would be sound that you can actually hear. So your lower end of sound that you don't need a hearing aid for will still come in the natural way, and you'll be able to hear it. It's much more natural, a much more natural sound just from these open fit hearing aids. Now, of course, or I shouldn't say hearing aids, ear molds. The open fit ear molds are a little bit more natural. Depending on your degree of hearing loss, that really doesn't matter. And if you actually have a large degree of hearing loss, the conventional ear mold is better, because it will keep sound from escaping as much. So the open fit, a little bit of the sound can escape back out the other side, but in the conventional they don't. Also, you can get like super cool colors for your conventional ear molds, because you just make them. In fact, ASU makes these ear molds. You can have, if you have a hearing aid, you can get your own custom ear mold. If you don't have a hearing aid, you can get your own custom earbuds that will go on any device. So when we can go back in and safely be around other people and have them put like wax and stuff in your ear, I want to get a custom ear mold for these guys. I think that would be totally awesome. It's like $100, so it's kind of expensive, but I guess the fit is supposed to be phenomenal. So I'm really looking forward to it. And if you're interested, you should check it out. Okay, so here's what's actually going on inside of a hearing aid. But let's not talk about that. Yeah, this is what I want to talk about. This is like the more conceptual version of what's going on in a hearing aid. This is like, you don't need to know this unless you're really like repairing a hearing aid or something. It's not something you need. This is a little bit more important. This is just the conceptual idea. So we bring the input right here. This is like sound the normal way, traveling through the air, and you have your microphone. The microphone picks up the sound the same way that this microphone that I'm using picks up the sound. And then this is inside the hearing aid here. You have to amplify the signal. Once the signal is amplified, it goes to the earbud portion, and then you have output, which then is picked up by the hair cells. It reaches the tympanic membrane first, but it all progresses in your typical fashion after that. We can look at this a little bit differently. So here's a better view of actually what's going on with the processing side. So we've got our microphones here, we've got the analog signal that comes in, and it's converted into a digital signal, and then we do some processing. we start adding filters to everything. We bring up certain frequency ranges. So we want to enhance 2000 hertz. We want to enhance 3000 hertz. But we don't want to do anything to 250, 500. We want to leave them where they are. We want to really enhance 8000 hertz and try to get everything at the same level. And we can do that here in the digital signal processing phase. Then we convert that back into an analog signal, and it, comes out, and then we sense it with our typical apparatus. You can see that the amplitude of this wave has been increased over here, and that's typically what you'd see. This is actually not the best representation because it would actually look a little bit different, because this is just increasing the amplitude overall, and what we actually want to do is only increase the amplitude for certain frequencies. So it would actually look a little bit different than that. It's not just stretching it, but it's a good representation. Okay, so one question that people tend to ask when they get a hearing aid is, will the hearing aid continue to make my hearing worse? So will I put in the hearing aid and then have to keep getting more and more and more and more amplification? No, not at all. Not unless there's something else that's, it's not the problem with the hearing aid that's going to cause you to have more and more amplification. These are only tuned so that they will present sounds as loud as you need them to detect them. So they're not being presented so loud that they'll actually damage the hearing. I suppose it's possible that there will be a little bit more age-related hearing loss. That typically progresses, remember, just because of the way that the cochlea is constructed. We can't really stop that. So that could progress slowly. But it's not going to cause, noise and volume-related damage, because the sounds are only amplified to the point that you can hear them and not to the point of damage. Okay, so let's talk about bone conduction devices. So what these do are, these are going to completely bypass the outer and middle ear. We are transmitting sound directly to the cochlea. Why would we use these? Well, sometimes you have malformations of the ear where you actually can't use a hearing aid. The other thing is sometimes these malformations of the ear can cause conductive hearing loss just because of the malformation. So then you need a bone conduction device. In fact, if you look down here, these are 3 different cases of what's called cauliflower ear. This can happen when you have damage to the cartilage of your ear and it repairs funny. A lot of wrestlers, sometimes boxers, have this. Anybody can get it if they, damage the cartilage of their ear. It's just more common for those populations to get it. So you can see this is just a mild case of cauliflower ear. This is a moderate case. It's really only affecting this upper portion of the pinna. And then here's a severe case of cauliflower ear where you can see that the ear canal is involved. There is a hole there so this person can hear, but it might be occluded somewhat. So they might have some degree of conductive hearing loss from this. And also, it would be tough to get a hearing aid to fit in here. Just because there's no pinna for it to grab onto, we mold each hearing aid to the pinna. And if there's not really a pinna here to mold it to, you can't really use a hearing aid. Maybe an in the canal, like a completely in the canal, but that depends on what's actually going on in the canal there. So this person would be a good candidate for a bone conduction device. The other thing is, sometimes we use these for mixed hearing loss, but that makes sense. We use them for conductive hearing loss, then surely we're going to use them for mixed hearing loss as well. What you do in that case is you amplify the sound with the bone conduction device. So you can apply the same sorts of filters that you do with a regular hearing aid with a bone conduction device. And instead of just transmitting the sound through the bone at the regular level, it will boost what needs to be boosted for you, in addition to transmitting it through the bone. And then lastly, these are used for single-sided deafness. So if a person is deaf, say on the left side, and they don't want to get a cochlear implant on the left side, which is a much more involved surgery, one thing that they can do is they can have a bone conduction device placed on the side that still functions, and it'll pick up sound from the side where the deafness occurs. So let's say I'm deaf on the left ear. I will have a bone conduction device over here on the right, but it's picking up sound from the left. And so then it'll vibrate and allow me to hear sound from over here. My regular way of hearing is still going to allow me to hear sound from the right side of my environment. So I still get both sides of whatever environment I'm in. This allows people to have a better awareness of their entire environment. This is a short video on how these bone conduction devices work. Remember, I said that there's a little bit of surgery involved with this, and here you're going to see how and why that surgery is necessary. So, yeah, this is a small titanium implant that goes into the bone. This thing right here kind of functions like the hearing aid. So it's taking in the sound and it's boosting it if necessary, changing it in whatever way it needs to be changed. And then it will transmit the sound here. It'll actually vibrate in this area. That vibration is transmitted through this little titanium screw that's implanted into the skull. And then because it's vibrating in the skull, that will actually move down through the bone, which we're going to see here, bypassing the external and middle ear and exciting the fluid of the cochlea. And then it's transmitted the same way. Once it's moving the fluid in the cochlea, it's just exactly the same as regular sound. And that's why it sounds so much like regular sound. All right. Yeah, next. This one is a different sort of system. This requires a little bit more surgery. Okay. So this one deals with a magnet. You have this magnet here and here. Well, actually, this is a magnet. This is just another titanium screw. But the magnet is attaching, through the skull to this titanium screw that just sits on the inside of the skull. So with one, you're just kind of like you're drilling a hole and you put a little titanium screw in, and that's mostly an outpatient surgery. This one, you're actually going to have to slip this in underneath into the skull. So, I mean, you can see it's not under the skull. This screw goes into the bone here. This is just under the skin. So instead of making direct connection and having this port that kind of comes through the skin and then into the bone, this is actually sitting right under the skin, and the magnet attaches on top of it. Oh yeah, you have to click. So then the magnet moves, and the titanium is then going to vibrate. And then from there it functions pretty much exactly the same way as the last one. The only difference is how it's actually attached. So this one, you have this thing screwed into the bone. It comes out through the skin, and this attaches onto it. In this one, this is surgically implanted into the bone. This lays right under the skin, and then this magnet attaches on the outside. So there's no open port into the skin right here. Okay. So let's see. We pretty much talked about this. It's going to be used for conductive hearing loss. If you're using a bone conduction device for conductive hearing loss, you're not amplifying anything. Really all you're doing is bypassing whatever is creating a blockage in the outer or middle ear. With mixed hearing loss, you're doing what you did in the previous one, but you're also boosting the signal, and that way you're accounting for the conductive loss, but then also applying some sort of amplification for the sensory neural loss. And in single-sided deafness, again, you're just using it to act like the deaf side.